This week's show brought to you by Injuries to Star Players. Buy one, get one free. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I guess the playoffs are in full force, and we can kind of prove that playoffs are random because a bunch of random stuff's going on. So we'll definitely be talking that. We're also going to be talking the Portland Trail Blazers and improving teams because we've had a few articles on that. And then we're also going to be talking about, sexual harassment on the internet. And it should go without saying, if you don't know that you shouldn't do it, don't do it. Anyway, I'm your host, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Patrick Minton, co-host, is back. Patrick, say hey.
Hey guys.
And of course, Patrick Minton is NBA Geek on the Twitters. And finally, we are produced by our own voice of God, Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Brian, let him hear your voice.
What's up, guys? And yeah, we've got some real series going on now here in the first round. Actually, some close ones here.
Well, yeah, let's hop into the playoffs. So the playoffs are definitely interesting. Obviously, there were some lopsided series. We had discussed last week how the Oklahoma City Thunder versus the Dallas Mavericks really didn't look like it was going to be a contest unless somehow Kevin Durant kept forgetting how to shoot. And he didn't even shoot that great, but it turns out that unless Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook were shooting worse than Andrea Bargnani, there was no hope for the Mavericks, and that played out as expected. Curious on your thoughts here. I will at least give some shout outs to Mark Cuban and keeping this kind of WWE-ish, Patrick. That's what I always bring up. At least Mark Cuban kept a narrative up where they were jostling back and forth because basketball wise, that was a boring as heck series, but at least the off court stuff, them sniping at each other was fun.
Yeah, the off-court stuff is always kind of fun to watch. I admit there. I mean, but I guess I've never been a fan of the off-court drama because it's just. I know that you guys, coming from your wrestling background, you are all about the off-court drama, but for the most part, I'm like, whatever, just shut the fuck up and play.
But
is my attitude.
But my point is when it's a boring series. So it's funny. Wrestling kind of goes back and forth on this too. When the wrestling match is good between two stars, like all of the top people are like, let them wrestle, let them have a match. Don't do all the stupid gimmicky stuff. You don't need all this chatting and talking. But then when it's bad is when you want the back and forth. So that's the point is from a basketball perspective, that Mavericks series was not close, was not good. So let Mark Cuban and Russell Westbrook and them fight back and forth.
Yeah, and Dre, you said it last time that the only game the Mavericks actually won was incredibly unlucky shooting, for the OKC guys.
Fun.
Yeah, and you could say the same thing about the only game the Rockets won in their series too.
I'll give a fun statistical note because I looked this up. The Mavericks series is thus far in Kevin Durant's career the worst shooting performance he's had in any playoff series in his entire career. So, I mean, he's played, they played the Spurs before. They've gotten beat by the Spurs going on to win a title. They played some good defensive teams. So I got to side more with bad luck than, amazing D on the Mavericks.
Anytime a player, goes a few games and doesn't shoot very well, I mean, sure, defense plays a part, but I'm always inclined if it's an extremely outlier performance by that player, I mean, it's got to be luck or health or some other thing. I mean, Steph Curry shot terrible in games in games 2 and 3 of the finals last year, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't Matthew Dellavedova's defense. And for those 2 games, suddenly everyone was talking about Dellavedova was like the Curry killer, and then in the fourth quarter of Game 3, he kind of caught on fire and hit 4 or 5 threes, and you could kind of see it. You could see that a switch had flipped, and then all of a sudden, games 4, 5, and 6 were totally different.
And I mean, Brian and I had even, because we're the consummate Warriors fans here, unless they're doing well, Brian has totally flipped on us, Patrick. You and I have to tell him how amazing that team is on a regular basis.
Hey, how many light years ahead are they now that Curry's hurt, huh, Joe Lacob? Sorry, keep going.
Wow, you turned fast, Brian.
No, I'm joking.
But last season when Brian was, staying confident about the Warriors in the finals, we were looking at the stats and yeah, Curry was missing some shots, but according to Sports VU, he was missing wide open shots. And, I'll give Dellavedova all the credit in the world for contested shots, but not wide open. All right, so the two kind of just not surprising pushovers. I've got the playoff bracket up in front of me, Patrick. I'll kind of just hop around and hope. I know you can keep up easily. I'm the one who's going to get scatterbrained here. But, OKC versus Dallas. Memphis, I like I said last week, I just give them all the credit in the world for being able to make the playoffs
It's
after
the only team in history to make the playoffs with a 28-man active roster.
I mean,
Sorry, having 28 different active
yeah, I get what
players
you're saying.
during the season. Yeah,
that
crazy,
that got that got ridiculous towards the end
crazy.
there. And it's funny. So Brian had made kind of the point that he had hoped that the Warriors would play Memphis, and obviously that didn't end up happening. I ended up taking on Houston. Now this part of the Western Conference is where things get super duper interesting. The Warriors are currently up 3-1 on the Houston Rockets, except obviously Curry is down, and it's even worse. And I've got some questions there. And then, of course, the other series that we have to wait to wrap up, the Clippers versus Portland. Well, the Clippers just lost their two best players. So this is getting interesting. I'm curious on both Brian and or Patrick's thoughts on kind of a baiting thing that I saw Ethan Sherwood Strauss throw out, and I'm sure some other people have thrown out the idea that because the Warriors were chasing 73 wins, that Steph Curry got overplayed, and as a result, that increased his odds of injury. And I don't. Obviously, I'm giving away my take. I'm not even going to try and get unbiased. My biased take is he only played 34 minutes a game. Bullshit
Right.
that happened, but I'm curious if you guys want
Can
to
you
weigh in.
Stop
can,
trolling, ESS. Stop
can
trolling.
you feel my palpable disgust for that argument through the microphone? I mean, it's such bullshit. First of all, there isn't really any there isn't really any significant correlation at all between playing time and injuries. This is an argument that Thibodeau has had with people all the time, and he's absolutely correct. There isn't a correlation there. So you could make arguments for like, okay, he played lots of minutes, the wear and tear, whatever. He's all tired. He's not rested for the playoffs, so he's not performing as well. Maybe you could make that argument, but there's just no correlation between injuries and playing time. Second of all, as you mentioned, Steph Curry rested a lot. He didn't rest by sitting out the second half of back to backs like Tim Duncan did, but he rested by taking a lot of fourth quarters off because the Warriors won games by 30 points occasionally. I mean, he did not have a huge load. His load was not anywhere near as high as, for example, LeBron James has been in many years, right? So to say that okay because they pushed for 73 wins, that because really what you're talking about one or two games off over the course of like 2 weeks that they might have taken. Because honestly, it would have been foolhardy for them to sit those players too much because then they get out of rhythm, right? Like even Pop didn't rest his stars too much. He had them playing, and he
And
he
and
never
and
he never gave them 2 days off in a row, for instance, because he wants his players to be fresh and ready for the playoffs. You can't have players like resting too much, or they start muscles start to kind of stiffen up a little bit, and you're not as fluid, you're not in a rhythm. It's just that argument just. And then finally, did anyone fucking watch the injury happen? Because it was as freakish as they get, and it was very clearly due to the unluck of a guy slipping in front of him, a guy who apparently sweats buckets slipping in front of him, and then he slipped on the wet spot. If he had played 10 minutes during the regular season instead of a couple thousand, that injury still would have happened.
He still would have
That's
plummeted into that massive lagoon of sweat. Like, come on, like it's
yeah, it's
ridiculous.
it's crazy. And by the way, just while I got so irritated about the freakishness of that injury, and not because I have any money on it. By the way, I have money on the Spurs to win the title because it was a good bet. But I mean, which
wow,
by the way, I'll happily sell that ticket to twice its face value to anybody that's interested. But um, I mean, I was just kind of pissed off because you just don't want to see that happen. Like it's just a bummer to see Steph Curry go down. And then I'm watching the game, and I must have seen is it Marcionis? Is that how you pronounce it? He
Monty
must have
Eunice.
fallen down like five more fucking times, and I'm like, dude, get your goddamn shoes on right and stay upright. Like, how many people are gonna get injured because you keep falling down? It was really kind of annoying to watch that.
Is that a conspiracy theory? He's the
That's
next
like the
dirty
series.
player
Seriously.
that just
They were
fall
like
behind all their best players and injure them.
run in front of Steph Curry and then fall down at an opportune moment. That's your job tonight. You got one job.
all right, there's that. Well, then there's also the other side, which gets really rough, which is the Clippers, are without pretty much indefinitely Chris Paul
Mhm.
or Blake Griffin. And by the way, one just side note, I love the kind of political BS of Blake Griffin's, when he was injured with the hand thing. Um, of course he's going to get played, and of course they're going to miss him. You know, like I thought it was funny that they were ever trying to posture at any point during the regular season that they might consider disciplining Blake Griffin and not playing him because he was back immediately for the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but I like this sounds mean, and we'll probably come up with it more on the show later, bringing it back. But you know, I figure why not talk Blake Griffin. One thing I really like about Blake Griffin, just as of late, is he clearly was an immensely talented draft pick and amazing. And both him and Anthony Davis are kind of just not staying on the court, and it really helps an argument. I feel bad about this, so I mean, get better soon, Blake Griffin. He's a possible triple double monster. So for the love of God, I want to see him on the court. I don't want to see him injured. I don't want to see boring playoff series. I don't want to see the Spurs versus Memphis with no players. But that being said, it's one of these interesting points because we've been arguing back and forth, especially with Portland, which same series, that you know, this idea that you need a top three pick to win and just the fragility of those top three picks that we've even seen in recent years. This idea that you're somehow able to bypass building a decent squad by just one of these players. And, you know, it's interesting to see Blake Griffin, who I think had all the talent in the world, and we may just never see him turn into that superstar leap we thought we were going to happen because he just can't stay healthy.
Yeah, he could be like the Bill Walton of his era, right?
I would say below because I mean Bill Walton. I say we got one or two MVP seasons out of, and I think
Well,
Blake
yeah,
Griffin
sure.
we never got. I think Blake Griffin had an MVP season in him, and I don't think we ever got to see it.
Last year's playoffs were as close as we got, right? That's that
Yeah,
stretch.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
he was pretty. Yeah, those playoffs were pretty impressive. Yeah.
Now, question on this. So, you keep bringing up that Arturo has talked the odds of Portland winning it all. And it's a 2-2 series now. And if you take the top two players off the Clippers, this is what we've been bashing them about. We basically said the Clippers have an amazing core. They have DeAndre and Blake Griffin and Chris Paul, but they have not done a good job building a support squad. Whereas we've recently been talking about how Portland has done an amazing job building a support squad and are maybe a star away from being a contender. How do we think this series ends out now that it's tied 2-2?
I think Portland wins.
Ooh.
I mean, I was already kind of I've been a fan of Portland, and like they had a surprising season, and you also have to remember that they've been significantly better in the second half of the season than they were in the first half of the season. So they're probably an even stronger team than they look based on their record and or differential because they had a very slow start, right, and then came on strong. And honestly, part of the reason for the slow start, I think, was it just took their coaching staff too long to figure out that Myers Leonard isn't as good as Mason Plumlee. So I mean,
To be fair,
that's a
that's
big
rough because
sure.
he looked really good last season. Myers Leonard did so.
He's always looked really
This is
good.
mean
No,
to
I,
say,
I'm
but
saying his stats looked really good. And
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, Plumlee's just a much better player, and certainly much better fit with having shooters like McCollum and Lillard, right? Because with Leonard, I mean, the shots he took just weren't. Yeah, they weren't the greatest shots, and it's better to have a guy who's going to be a hustler and who's going to get your good shooters more shots. Um, so I mean, again, to get back to my point, I think they're a stronger team than they look like on paper. I think with the Chris Paul injury and the Paul injury matters more, but with both of those injuries, they simply are the better team now. I mean, I think if you look at the players that are coming off of the Clippers bench, I mean, to replace them, I like Portland in this series now.
well, one rough thing. I've got some. We keep teasing tools that we haven't shown, which I'll just keep doing. But I'm looking at their numbers, and the Blazers have a 0.8 points over par per game this season, and the Clippers have a 4.3 points over par per game. So obviously the Clippers are the much stronger team. The problem being Chris Paul is worth almost points over
Yep.
par on his own. So
ooh.
you take Chris Paul off that team, and suddenly
And it's
Port-
bigger than it looks because it's like because that impact of Chris Paul is in itself big. But the other thing is like Chris Paul is important in this series because he defends Damian Lillard, right? So he's one of the guys that keeps Lillard from being a 50-point machine, right? Because Lillard is a guy who can go pretty crazy from beyond the 3-point line, and now you've lost your best defender against that guy. So I think it's an even bigger impact than it looks.
And a
Well,
worst part is the backup. Sorry if I
yeah,
cut you off there,
that's all I was
Brian. But
gonna
yeah,
say, Dre.
Austin Rivers is,
Yeah.
yeah, the problem is you're not, we talk this like above replacement player or above average a lot. And the issue is that that's a fallacy because in basketball, you don't have a minor league team stocked full of replacement level players. You have your bench, and your bench is varying degrees. And the issue is the Clippers bench has Austin Rivers and Pablo Prigioni behind Chris Paul. And Pablo Prigioni is, I think, 105, and Austin Rivers is terrible. So neither of those are great options. And to your point, Patrick, I wouldn't want either one of them defending Damian Lillard, who I've been calling overrated recently. But as you pointed out, if Damian Lillard kind of did what Brian is a fan of, Brian as a coach has one very simple strategy, which is you should shoot more threes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
if Damian Lillard shot more threes, we would actually say, "Oh, you're amazing. You're an amazing player." Our
Yeah.
problem with Damian Lillard is actually his shot selection because he is amazing from beyond the arc. And
Yeah, and
if
if you're
this,
looking at what he did last year, that's exactly what he did. Last year, he shot
yeah.
a lot of threes and was very good at them, and so he was a very good player. This year, he's regressed a little bit because he's not shooting as well from three, and he's not shooting as many threes. But I still think so. I have a secret like theory that Lillard is going to be the next player to break 300 threes after Steph Curry. That next year, and it might depend on the coach he gets, although it's unlikely they're going to change coaches now after this season. But I feel like Lillard could break that 303 barrier easily because he definitely likes to shoot it.
He's also the
uh,
only other guy other than Curry, Patrick, that can hit those long ones
Yeah.
somewhat regularly, and that's important.
I don't think that's going to remain true. I think guys like Kevin Durant are going to practice it and are going to start becoming very.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to see that.
I was going to say on Lillard, the one thing, just looking at his numbers the last two seasons, I was going to start calling him possibly overpaid. If he keeps up his performance from this season into next, he'll be overpaid. So that'd be perfect, Patrick, because I write an article or two bashing him, saying he's not the star the Clippers, or not the Clippers, the Blazers need. And then of course he goes out, turns into Curry-esque in terms of shooting style, star player, and I'll look foolish.
And
All
Dre,
right.
I was just
Okay.
gonna say I want to answer your original question, which is, Arturo is saying, oh, Portland at 100 to 1, that might be, Vegas might be undervaluing them. Well, it's moved quite a bit. We've got the odds up right now, and it's looking like they're around 35 or 40 to 1. They've moved all the way down to there. The
Which, by
Clip,
the way, is a total sucker's bet.
yeah, we could get into that right after this, but I was just gonna
Oh yeah.
say that the Clippers are now more like 50 or 60 to 1. So Vegas thinks Portland is a favorite over the Clippers. However, Patrick, you're probably gonna say, what about the Spurs, Warriors, and Cavaliers?
Yeah, I mean, with those injuries, the Blazers' chances of making it to the Spurs have increased greatly. Their chances of being thumped thoroughly by the Spurs have remained exactly the same. So, I think 100 to 1 wasn't that great before all the injuries, and now after all the injuries, 100 to 1 might be close to a fair bet. Because seriously, you have a bunch of parlays. You have a parlay that they're going to win a best of 3 series against the Clippers. Let's assume they're evenly matched, right? So that's
We could
already
even give them favorites. Let's say 60-40, or, if
okay.
you
Let's
want to
make
go
them
nuts,
60-40
70-30.
favorites. So they gotta this is the parlay. They have to win a best of 3 where they're a 60-40 favorite. Then they play the Warriors, where let's assume, right? And even without Curry, I do not think they're a favorite in that series. But let's
I'd
say it's
agree.
closer. So let's say they're 40-60 in that series, right? So so they got to do that, and then they have to beat the Spurs, where they're going to be a massive underdog. Like I think they'd be. I mean, you're probably looking at like 20,
Yeah,
80 in that series,
80-20 tends to be the biggest
right?
disparity when you
So
have like a
then
1 versus 8 seed. So I'd agree.
So that's already a crazy parlay. What have we got? We've got zero point 0.6 times zero point 0.4 times zero point 0.2, which somebody do some quick math for me while I keep talking. So then after that, they got to play the presumably the Cavs, where you also have to assume they're going to be an underdog. And maybe it's not as extreme there, but let's call it 60-40 there, right? So those are pretty bad odds, right?
So what you're looking at there, Patrick, is actually, I mean, when you said 1 in 100, I mean, that's about 2% is what
Right, but
that
it's
factors
it's
out.
1 in 130. It's 1 in 35 to 1 now, right?
Yeah, so it's not worth that. And I think I kind of agree with you. I think you're being I I think you were right. You even said this when you started listing those odds off. Like, we're being generous, especially because it's worth noting that they are not they're the fifth seed. They are not going to be the home court for the remainder of the playoffs unless unless a 5 or 6 seed out
Yeah,
out
yeah.
out
It's
east sneaks by, and that's not happening. So
To be honest, I think even 80-20 is being generous with this because I think so. I would say the Spurs are probably an 80-20 favorite in any given game, which I think makes them more than an 80-20 favorite for the series, right?
well, I
I'm,
mean
I'm
the,
not
the
sure
thing
about the probability math because how often does the underdog win in a best of seven? But I'm pretty sure it's less than 20% of the time when you're an 80-20 dog in a given game, right?
yeah, I
Because
mean
of
that
the numbers
the
distribute.
Spurs are one of the, I mean that's what we need to remember is despite the fact that the Warriors with the last couple of games, including some victories above the Spurs, managed to pull ahead. It is worth noting that the Spurs are legitimately, according to the numbers, one of the greatest teams in the history of the NBA.
Yeah.
And when we put on the factors I like putting on, which is modern NBA, so 1980s on, and 3 point line where it's at, which is 19,
And
excluding that 3 year stretch. Basically, they're a top five team all time. So,
yeah,
They ended up like dead even with the Warriors in point margin, right? By the end of the year.
yeah.
yeah. All right. So yeah, we've talked
Although
the
I could rant about this, like, does the Warriors' point margin count as much because they had a lot of star players sitting in a lot of fourth quarters?
and they had Iguodala and Festus Ezeli injured. Like that
Yeah,
that was the hugest part to me at the end of the season is they were winning these games with Festus and Iguodala on the bench. And Brian and I had talked a ton about this team, and it's like, wow, this bench, their bench isn't as good as the Spurs, but they're missing some of their better bench players, and their
yeah.
better bench players came back at the
I,
end of the season and they started winning again. I'm like, yeah, they're better than their
I
record.
think it was, by the way, to talk about more trolling. I think it was Ethan Sherwood Strauss, but it might have been somebody from 538 who posted like an infographic saying it doesn't look good for the Warriors because when only Dre and only Draymond Green and Clay Thompson play, they're only like plus 1.4 point margin. But I'm just like, I can't. I mean, honestly, I want to pull my hair out when I see stuff like that because clearly you're looking at samples from a regular season from times when Steph Curry was on the bench for reasons other than injury, meaning he was probably sitting out because they were subbing in the second team. It's like most of those minutes are with either Clay or Dre or both playing with the bench because that's the way the game flow goes, right? After about 8 to 9 minutes, Curry comes out. Maybe 10 minutes, Curry comes out. Livingston comes in. Then a couple more subs go out, and so you have a few minute stretch there where you have Clay and Draymond Green playing with three bench players. That's clearly not the team that's going to be rolled out next week without Steph Curry, right? He's
Oh,
going to
oh
be
yeah.
playing. He's going to be playing with Andre Iguodala and with Andrew Bogut, and it's going to be a much better team than most of the lineups that Draymond Green and Clay Thompson played without Steph Curry in the regular season.
This is a
Uh,
classic point that Dave always brings up about stupid on-off statistics. And
yeah,
those fans of the show know that we think on-off statistics and those things are so stupid for a variety of reasons. But the basic point is he says players don't play every minute of the game with the exact same motivation. What you're saying, it's like there are points in the game where, you're up by 10 and there are 3 minutes in the game. And so instead of doing what they do, which is, Curry runs up the court, and if Curry's got an open three, he's going to take it. They'll just dribble the ball up the court and hold it for 24 seconds and then throw it to Bogut, who doesn't have a good shot. And then Bogut takes a bad shot. And it's like, that's not what we're going to see in the playoffs, prime time. So it's so silly to use those as samples, like you're saying, but we see it.
I mean, it's a classic selection bias what you just found there, right?
You
Like
guys are stuck in
there's
2008. I'm
there's
sorry.
huge
All
Stuck
right.
in
selection
2008.
bias. There's huge selection bias in every on-off number, but that one in particular is just a wow. Like that's a really big one. Um,
But I was going to say let's try and head east. I'm curious what you thought on Detroit. I kind of mentioned Patrick and just some of the updates on this. Obviously we're still doing position adjustment stuff, and we still have the arguments over what's a wing versus what's a big. But that being said, Tobias Harris, I think, has looked better this season than I thought he did when I was first analyzing that trade. I think I was looking at him more as a power forward, and he is more of a tweener, and that is
yeah.
definitely how Detroit's playing him. And if they're playing him as a tweener, that's actually great. He seems to be playing fine there. We've always liked Andre Drummond. That series, it went 4-0, but they had a couple of close games. So I actually liked how Detroit looked, and I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that series.
I think Detroit's in like a pretty good position for next year. I guess what I'd say. I mean, I think when you're looking at Detroit and Portland and the Celtics, they're all kind of following similar models of, we're not very good now, but we don't really need to tank. We're just going to try to find some undervalued players and compete as hard as we can and try to get better. And I mean, I think everyone that listens to the show knows I'm a much bigger fan of that model than I ever was of the whole, oh, you got to tank to be good idiocy. Um, and I mean, even so, this is funny because even the Celtics are following that model now, where let's collect a bunch of young good players, and then hopefully some of them will be pretty decent, and we can win 35, 45 games, right? And then we'll wait to grab a superstar, and we'll just keep collecting young players like that. And what's interesting is that no one seems to really have figured out that, oh, that's exactly what they were doing the year before they got Garnett and Ray Allen as well. Like they were in that mode then too. The because they used all those assets to get those players, but they had those assets in the first place. And if you
Well,
look at
and
if you
they
look at
kept
that
some.
team,
They
right?
kept
And
Rondo. They
if
kept
you
Paul Pierce. Yeah.
right, they won like was it 25 games the year before that? I think not very many, right? And so people were like, "Oh, they're tanking, tanking." But if you look at the roster and you assume they had not made the Ray Allen trade or they had not made the Kevin Garnett trade, they still had like a Rondo who was about to make a leap, and they still had a couple other good players. They had Paul Pierce coming back healthy. That team was probably going to win 35 plus games the year after. So they
I
were
think.
still like they were still marching up the ladder of success, not down the treadmill of mediocrity, right? So, I mean,
Well, to the point there too. I think that they had an interesting. The Celtics had an interesting byproduct, which is we have some kind of hindsight bias because what was his name? Al Jefferson.
oh
He
yeah.
got he looked really strong young and got some injuries and just has never kind of come back, but he looked
He
great.
tore his MCL, I want to say it was in his year in Minnesota, and just never came back after that. Right?
And
He was never as good after that.
Jeff Green, I mean, we've mocked him for a lot. Obviously he's another injury person too. He's had a heart condition, but he looks strong. He was a mellowish player, and by that what I mean is there is not a draft model that I would have been mad at picking him. It's just after a couple of years in the NBA, you go, oh, he had all the potential and just didn't pan out. So it's like to your point, I think it looks like they were much bigger thieves in the KG and Ray Allen trades, and they were. I mean, they legitimately. Even when you have a good prospect, if you're able to trade a prospect for a star now, you do that like every time.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it looks even worse in
But yeah,
hindsight because they just didn't pan out.
when I look back, and I said this at the time in Minnesota, like the word was that Ainge said, I'll give you all this stuff, but you can't have Rondo. Was apparently the thing in the Garnett trade. And I've always been bitter that Mikhail agreed to that trade because I'm like, I'm sorry, you're the one that has Kevin Garnett. So why are you fucking let the other person giving you some ultimatum about who can and cannot be in the trade, right? You should be the one giving ultimatums saying, well, you put Rondo in there or we'll just keep Garnett. I mean, it's pretty easy, right? Like I've always been bitter about that the guy who had the MVP allowed the other guy to set ultimatums about who must or must not be included in the trade. It's just insane. It's like,
All right, so this one gets interesting. I'll be candid. I have not watched the East at all, really. So I'm curious, Patrick. Do you think either Boston or Atlanta? Atlanta's up 3-2, and it's an interesting. They're scrapping. We're happy about this because I think Atlanta was up 2-0 and we were feeling sad. So good on you, Boston, for coming back. Do you think either Atlanta or Boston gives Cleveland a fit in the next round?
no.
Oh, sad day. All right.
I mean, yeah, no. I think Cleveland's pretty much rolling right now, and LeBron's in playoff mode.
All right. And so last annoying, prognostication mode. This is going to be so outdated so quickly. It's my favorite type of thing to put on the podcast. Patrick, who do you think wins between Atlanta and Boston?
I think it's Atlanta in seven.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's what we want to see. We always fight for
I
game
mean,
seven.
that's so far that's been like everyone's winning their home games, right?
Yeah.
So
And so,
I think it's going to continue like that.
all right. And so next series, I again haven't watched this, so it's all on you, Patrick, if you want to add any nuance. But I will say this. The Charlotte Hornets versus the Miami Heat. The major difference is obviously using on-off statistics or whatever you want to call it. Frank Kaminsky in the starting lineup is clearly the right maneuver if they want to compete.
I have not watched a minute of that series, but I bet you're wrong.
It's 80 to 78 Hornets with 5 minutes
I'm
to go
being
right now.
I have
sarcastic.
not watched a single minute of that series because
Batum is back, by the way. That's key for the Hornets.
honestly, I just couldn't care less. But no, I haven't watched any of that series. I've been watching a lot of the West Coast games, and I've watched the Boston Atlanta stuff. I watched one Cavs game, I think, but I actually I proclaim myself to be not qualified to offer an opinion about the Heat.
You're going to make
Um,
Michael Jordan cry not watching his Hornets.
I'm just being sarcastic because yeah, Batum got injured, and then they put Frank Kaminsky in the starting lineup just because he's been okay, but as we'd expect, nothing great. But they just started rolling since that, so I'm just going Wisconsin pride there. Uh,
okay.
it's an interesting series. I mean, I think it's just one of those where I think it's a funny combo where I think the Hornets are kind of what we've said. They've got a really good collection of players. We really like Batum. He's close to star level, but he isn't even by our metrics. He's not what you would need. He's not the Ben Wallace level of quote unquote role player star you need to win behind. So they've got some good players, and we like them, but they're not there. Whereas the Miami Heat actually, do have a star player in Hassan Whiteside, and do have a few decent players. It's just those teams are both, lacking in one way or the other. And I think the Heat get the edge in that I think they do have home court advantage and they do have Whiteside. So we'll have to see. Although, right now it's tied 2-2 and the Hornets are up by 3 with 5 minutes left. And as I mentioned, Kaminsky started and Batum's back. So
Dre,
I,
his biggest fan, Andrew Sutton, who's in the chat here, thinks they do have a chance against the Cavs.
who has a chance against them?
Miami does, yeah.
So if Miami makes it to the finals, all right. So let's go to the last series. Patrick, what the heck is going on with Toronto? I mean, number 2 seed. This is
Man,
one of
this
those.
team just collapses in the playoffs every year, don't they? It's kind of amazing.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, isn't it all down to the fact that Lowry has not been very good?
We've got an Ian Levy article about this actually up on camera right now, guys. So what he did is let's see, what's the exact stat that he says? It's points created versus efficiency, and yeah, Lowry and DeRozan are both in the deep red here. They're not being very efficient.
Well, Lowry is their
Meanwhile,
best
Paul
player,
George,
so if he's not good,
yeah,
then
he's
there's your
done
explanation,
okay.
right?
The thing about Lowry though is this, so what we have up here is just efficiency on offense. He's done the box score stuff, rebounds and assists and all that like he usually does. So
Oh, yeah,
Lowry's
but
still
he
doing
also
okay.
usually scores very efficiently.
Yeah, DeRozan
So
though,
for his own standards, he's not very good.
but yeah, I mean Dre, your boy Masai, like he's got to give up on DeRozan long term, right? If he wants to move this team forward.
I hope so.
well, I mean, he's seemed to be very good at it in that, getting rid of the overpaid scorers, and the one advantage on DeRozan was kind of like the very bottom of the list because if you recall when he came to Toronto, he had Rudy Gay, he had Andrea Bargnani. I'm inclined to agree with DeRozan, and I think DeRozan does have stock. So don't quite understand this chart, but yeah, DeRozan is hurting him, and then Kyle Lowry just never shows up for the playoffs. So that's really interesting. They're still up 3-2, but I just, I think
I think they'll make it past Indiana, but then I mean, the way the Heat's playing right now, Dwayne Wade looks a lot better than he does in the regular season. This is possibly more credence to Arturo's theory that once the playoffs start, all the players start using steroids and other illicit drugs because there's no drug testing in the playoffs. Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe some funky stuff is going on with some 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 questionably some ethically questionable things are perhaps going on with Dwayne Wade's knee. He does look better, but or also I think they're playing Whiteside more minutes now than they did during the regular season, which also has an impact.
They're
So
starting him again now, I think.
yeah,
yeah,
whatever the
well,
heck was
yeah,
going on before.
And Dre, just to help you out this chart a little bit, I was wrong earlier. It does include assists. It looks like this is assists plus net points, basically, is what this chart is.
All right, I like it.
so yeah, I mean I think they'll make it past Indiana. I kind of like the Heat in the next series, but not powerfully so. Could go either way on that one.
I mean, I wish I could
I mean,
care
I guess it's
more.
history. It just looks like, I mean, this is 3 years in a row now that Toronto's just kind of collapsed in the playoffs. They got to win a playoff series. They
I
got to
wish
get
I
over the hump.
I wish I could care more about the East though. I mean,
Yeah.
I think to your point, if LeBron is rolling, I don't see him taken down.
LeBron's rolling. Kevin Love looks really good. They're playing a great lineup that I like with Love at center, um, and getting Tristan Thompson more
That's
minutes.
what I was going to ask.
Yes, he's starting to.
It's I mean I really like that lineup. It's much better than the lineup that has Mozgov starting and then Love at power forward. So they're rolling and they're finally actually doing the thing where they get their five best players on the court at the same time. So I think the Heat, sorry, the Cavs are another team that maybe is even a little better than they look during the regular season right now.
Yeah, and just to drive that point home, like Love, Tristan Thompson, LeBron, that's a ridiculous, three-man front court. Like that's easily
Yeah,
the best in the league. And I think even Kyrie Irving has been not too bad either.
I'll
and
say he's
then
still
it's not
taking
that
a
they're
lot of
great
shots,
on.
but he's shooting 47 from three. If he's going to shoot
There you
47
go.
from three, then go ahead, shoot away.
Yeah, yeah. That's that was him last year, right? Where he shot a lot of shots, but he made them, so who cares?
All right. Well, I'm not even going to try and do any finals predictions or whatever. I'm going to get into one other article that I wrote about a while back, where I called out Bill Simmons back in the day because Bill Simmons was saying, I think it was the playoffs where Derrick Rose and Dwight Howard were out injured, and said there need to be an asterisk. And my point was, according to Bill Simmons' logic, essentially every playoffs needed an asterisk by it because stuff happens, and I think this year is the
Yep,
same.
got to get lucky.
But what I also say is
When I
important
say you got
is
to get lucky, it's not like because there's a difference between luck in terms of the other team's best player got injured. There's also the luck of our best player stayed healthy, right? I mean, it's type one versus type two errors, but it doesn't matter. Like it's luck either way, right? I
The
mean,
Doc Rivers theory of the playoffs.
the Doc Rivers theory is absolutely valid. He phrased it in a stupid way, but it's absolutely valid. Every team that
Yeah.
wins has to get lucky, and your luck is usually okay. All your best players have to stay healthy, right? I mean, the type of luck where every team we play somehow their best player gets decimated with an injury that never happens to anyone, right? Like that. I mean, you still have to march through four playoff rounds of playoff caliber teams to get to the finals. I mean, Jordan played against in his first finals didn't have to play against Magic Johnson,
for
so
a few
put an
games.
asterisk
Magic
there.
Johnson and James Worthy, yeah.
Yeah, and James Worthy. Yeah, let's put an asterisk on that one, shall we? Even though that's ridiculous because that Bulls team was stacked. That was an amazing team, right? I mean, I still think they're the favorite there in those finals, but I mean, that's the NBA. That's luck. I mean, that's why you have Billy Bean every year just shaking his head and saying my shit doesn't work in the playoffs because there's luck involved, right? There's luck involved in staying healthy. There's luck involved in you still got to win because the best team doesn't always win a best of seven, right? The in a 60-40 matchup, the best team wins like something like 43% of the time just because that's the way statistics work, right? That's what happens. Players have off games at the wrong time, right? I mean, the Heat last
Well,
year were up 2-1 against the Warriors at one point, and if Steph Curry just randomly keeps shooting poorly, maybe the Heat are the champion last year. I mean, you got to get lucky. There's no question about it.
and I mean, to that point, we argue a lot because we're about to go into Portland, and so I'm definitely getting us ramped up for treadmill of mediocrity and replacement and all that fun jazz, all of the greatest hits from the
Got a
Boxscore
hard
Geeks.
stop in 10 minutes, so go fast.
Oh, you got a hard. Okay, geez. All right. Well, anyway, because we start, I'm impressed. You guys started late to wait for me, and then we have to finish up quick. Okay. So anyway, all I was going to say on that then is that we've always argued making the playoffs is a better decision than not for tanking. And to your point, you can't win if you don't play, and random stuff happens in the playoffs. So to the Portland Trailblazers point, if you went by the standard treadmill of mediocrity point, they would have just, this year tried to get another star for Damian Lillard by tanking. And instead they got some replacement level players, whatever that freaking means, and got into the playoffs. And as a result, they now stand poised to make a second round. And, based on the financials, that's worth millions of dollars this season alone, just in ticket revenue and television revenue. And then additionally, like I've harped on this before, anytime you go to a game that you give personal information to buy a ticket, and because of Ticketmaster and all that stuff, that is becoming more and more prevalent. Prevalent? I don't know the pronunciation there. Anyway,
Prevalent.
thank you. Prevalent. But because of that, they'll call you and say, "Hey, do you want season tickets?" Or, "Hey, do you want a 10 game pass?" That is huge for long-term success. So we are such a big fans of make the playoffs and see what happens and get the money, as opposed to hope that one of your draft picks turns out great. Um, Other lessons on the Portland Trailblazers. We talk most improved. I think the article fleshes it out, Patrick. Since you've got a hard stop in 10, and I want to hit our last topic before that, I will actually ask if you had anything to add to the most improved article that I put out that tried to cover a lot. That thing grew very quickly.
Are we talking about the most improved or the Trailblazers improvement?
So the most improved had 2 points. Basically, CJ McCollum improved, quote unquote, by just taking more
Right.
shots. And it's fascinating that what nobody noticed is he essentially just took LaMarcus Aldridge's shot. And
Yeah.
everybody told us LaMarcus Aldridge needs to shoot to space the floor because who else can shoot at an average clip to space the floor? And apparently the answer is a 24-year-old guard that no one thought was a big deal last season.
Yeah.
So that was that. And then, additionally, just if you're looking at that 44 to 46% true shooting range in the NBA, that skill is highly replaceable and for not an expensive amount. They were able to, the Portland Trailblazers were able to do that in an offseason. So those kind of 2 points on most improved, where people are impressed by more shots when we're not, because average is average, and that, shooting decently. I'm not talking Steph Curry great or, any other players, Kevin
Hey,
Durant.
Kobe Bryant took 50 shots. No one else does it, so he must be the only one that can do it.
Exactly. But that's all I'm saying is replacing a slightly above average offense in the NBA for below market cost is obviously very doable because the Portland Trailblazers were able to do it in this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing I actually missed from your article is, you said that, well, McCollum's really not all that. So why did the Trailblazers improve? I don't think we did enough to address that topic. And I think the answer is you look at players like Aminu and Davis and Plumlee, and you can see why they improved because those players are very good players,
Well,
and they have.
didn't get as bad as we thought. They went from 51 wins to
Sorry, yeah,
54.
yeah, I don't mean improved. I mean, what's the difference between the 26 wins that Vegas had and
Yeah.
like what 44 that they won, 45? And like I said at the time in my season preview, I was like, this is the easiest over on the board. This is going to be a decent team, right? Because they went out and they signed a bunch of decent players. So they did kind of the opposite of what the Lakers did 2 years ago after Dwight left. 2 years after Dwight left, the Lakers went out and they signed every terrible player they could possibly find for 5 to 6 million on a 1 or 2 year contract. They like Wes Johnson and Chris Kaman. They just went out there and they was like, let me find the worst players I could possibly find and then offer them 5 million. Whereas the Trailblazers just went out and they said, let's try and find some players that are pretty good that no one seems to know about. Let's offer them 4 or 5 million, see if they want to play for us. And it's worked out great for them. They are stepping up that ladder of success.
Yeah, and then by the way, and last point to your thing, Patrick, why I didn't talk as much about that why they improved is that Brian did write that article a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I should have noted it though. I did not note it at the top, so that's shame on me for that.
Well, yeah. And with regards to the most improved player, I'm still going to stand by the fact that it's Steph Curry because
No,
I'm sorry, you go from, what did he have, 286 threes last year? You go from 286 threes to 400 threes without dropping in efficiency, and I think he even improved his efficiency. That's insane.
Well, so should we go into your article, Jay?
I agree with the person who, and I forget who it was, the person who said that going from MVP to even better MVP is a much bigger accomplishment than going from good to great. It's a much more difficult. Kevin Durant did a similar thing like 3 years ago, right? Where he was also on my most improved list because he was like amazing, and then the year after he was like fuck amazing, I'm gonna be amazing squared, and he put up like one of the best offensive seasons of all time. That's what Steph Curry did. He was amazing last year, and then he came back and he's like, you know what, amazing is kind of not doing it for me anyway more. So I'm gonna turn this knob up to 11 if you guys don't mind. I mean, that was totally deserves the most improved player vote for me.
I'll still put him. I'll put him above Cantor for me, but I'm still putting him behind Westbrook, and that pains me to say. All right, I want to at least let you get 30 seconds of an FU on our last topic, Patrick.
Really,
And
30 seconds on this?
well, I'll see if I can trick you into staying late. You said hard stop, so it's on you, I guess. So, and apologies, this is scheduling on my part. Didn't realize how where we were going, but there was a campaign recently, hashtag more than mean, and one of the most terrifying things to do. They had men come in and read real comments to female sports journalists that they have gotten. And there was a piece recently in the Guardian similar, and this is horrific stuff. And
Yeah,
the comment that I wanted to make on that is first off, we've had a few people on, we've talked this a lot on our show. The rampant amount of sexism in sports media is just so absurd, and I don't think people realize how bad it gets. And then this is what I wanted to comment on. I saw a little, I'll put quote unquote backlash to more than mean, where a bunch of people said, "Well, I get mean comments too. Well, what are they complaining about? People are mean to me on the internet too." And I wanted to comment and say, if ever anybody comes out and says they're getting picked on or bullied on the internet, and you want to say me too, but then instead of your response being that really sucks and I'm so sorry you had to put up with it, you start turning it into a pissing contest. And I use that word deliberately here because it tends to be a lot of men that, whatever. It's such the wrong thing, and it's such a dick move, and I can't believe it. And I don't buy anybody that ever says it. This was you, Patrick. I'm gonna let you go. Does anybody that ever sees someone complain on the internet about getting bullied and shows evidence like this, shows the comments that say, I'll say trigger warning, but I'm going to say, Patrick, I don't even want to repeat any of this stuff. So I'll put it there in case it comes out, but I don't want to say it. Anybody that comes back to that with, aggression towards the person who's complaining, you're not allowed to talk. And I don't care what you say about your experience. You have failed at empathy, and more than that, you failed at being a human being.
I guess I don't really have a lot to rant about this or say because I just agree with everything you said. Like, honestly,
Really?
if I mean, like, seriously, if you watch that video, and absolutely trigger warning, like, the things they say are so beyond reprehensible. Like, think of the worst things you've heard any person say in, any supervillain ever say in a movie. I mean, it's just terrible, terrible things. Like things where if you said that aloud to your mother, you'd get slapped by your. I mean, it's just like totally like despicable things. I guess I almost want to repeat the argument, repeat the things that are said just to make it clear what I'm talking about here. But I guarantee you that men do not face that kind of abuse. If you're some man who's saying, "Hey, I get abused too," and you're comparing the abuse you get to this abuse, you're just A, you're full of shit, and B, then why do I care? I mean, you're clearly an
Well,
asshole.
my point,
So instead of
I
saying, "Hey,
would,
I get that
Patrick.
too," and so I totally sympathize with you because I get that too, and it's terrible. You're saying I get that too, so man up. Fuck you. Get the fuck off the internet. Like
That's
I
what
can't.
I'm agreeing with you, Patrick. What I'm saying is I don't believe you, and that's what I'm saying is that if you're telling the truth and your response to someone that gets that level of abuse is what you're saying, the just deal with it, then I'm like, how were you able to go through that level of abuse and come out with it and tell people to suck it up? Like that makes literally no
There's
sense,
no
and I
way.
don't buy
There
it.
is no way. Anyone who's saying that didn't listen to the video and is making assumptions that maybe the things that are being said. So in the first like 30 seconds of the video, you got kind of a light little thing playing in the background, some music playing in the background, and people think they're on Jamie Kimmel being tweets, right? And they're just saying things like, "So and so is a washed up, terrible writer." It's like, yeah, I'm sure you've heard that too, asshole. But that's not what we're talking about. Because if you keep watching the video, they say some shit that I guarantee you have not heard before. It's like, I mean, there's no way you could possibly ever have been the subject of abuse like that and then turn around and tell someone else who has also been the subject of abuse like that that, oh, they should man up.
I 100% agree. And
No
so
way.
to everybody listening, go check out More Than Mean. It's really tough to watch, but I say it's important because I think so many people on the internet, especially bloggers, privileged ones like ourselves, we deal with bad comments. We deal, I have to deal with Kobe haters that don't like that I call Kobe
Yeah, I
overrated.
mean, I've been
And
called lots of names, but no one's ever told me anything nearly as abusive as the stuff in that video. Like,
exactly. And
not even in the same world. And I guarantee you, because I piss people off for a living on the internet. I mean, every show we do is marked explicit. I piss a lot of people off. I guarantee you, if I were female, I would have all kinds of disgusting things said about me. But since I'm a man, everybody's like, "Oh, cool, that guy's edgy and he says provocative things." And if I don't like him, I'll call him an asshole or a dick or whatever. But that's the worst I get. And it's like, I'm provocative on purpose, and that's the worst I get. And there's a lot of women there who are not even being provocative. They're just sort of doing a normal journalist job, and they're hearing these terrible things that I mean, honestly, I keep wanting to say it only so that you know how terrible it is, so that you get my point, but I'm not going to because
It's
trigger
rough stuff.
warnings, and
But
also
yeah,
because I don't want my mom to ever listen to this. Jesus.
yeah, taken out of context. But yeah, it's watch it because if your first instinct whenever a woman on the internet complains about how people mistreat them is to say, deal with it. I have people who are assholes in my comment section too, or assholes on my Twitter feed too. Just go watch it. And
Yeah.
the shocking reality is it's way too normal. I mean, we've spoken with other sports journalists, we've spoken with females on the internet. It is not acceptable how normal it is, and it's not acceptable how many
Yeah,
people don't
you
realize it.
know, we should just keep the link handy. I would just like to point everyone that bitches and moans about how people are mean to them. If you're a white heterosexual male, you get pointed right to John Scalzi's block because you're fucking playing the video game of life on easy mode and you're bitching about it. Um,
That is a
I mean,
good quote. Who said was that Scalzi?
oh, if you have not read this article, oh my
I
God, it's
think
one of
I
the
have,
best
but
pieces on the internet. Like that basically white heterosexual males play the game of life on easy mode. And that doesn't mean every heterosexual male has had an easy life. That's not what he meant at all. And he meant that in terms of blank slates, if that's where you're going to start, you know, you're way off, you're way better off than any other default setting, right? If
yeah,
you were if
oh
you
yeah,
were going to have
I've
your
read the article
soul
you're
thrown
talking
back in
about.
the cosmos and asked, how would you like to be reincarnated in terms of race, ethnicity, and sexuality? If you want to live life on easy mode, you better pick white, male, and heterosexual.
Yeah, there's a Louis C.K. joke about this. It's pretty funny. We'll have to link that.
And yeah, sorry to keep, yeah, and if you even just want to hop off, Patrick, if you've got super hard stuff, I'll
Actually, I'm
say
going to hop off. Count that as my shout out, John Scalzi.
that's an excellent shout out. Thanks for
See
being
you
on,
guys.
Patrick. And sorry I kept us over late. Brian, are you okay to go a little longer just so I can wind
I
us
got
down a
about
little bit?
5 minutes. Yeah, let's wind
Fine.
down.
Have fun,
Just
guys.
thanks, Patrick. And yeah, and so again, take full responsibility. I was the one that ran late, so you lost about 10, 15 minutes of Patrick, basically a bench player, kept Patrick out of the playoffs. That'd be me. I'm the Monte Eunice of this, or Monte Eunice, however you say it, of this podcast. And to wind that down, I mean the John Scalzi point, I will agree because the major difference is you get a lot of edge with privilege, but if you're a white heterosexual male, the advantage is if you're able to put on a business suit, you can basically blend in anywhere. And there are a lot of people, women on the internet included, that do not have that luxury. That no matter how rich, no matter how famous, no matter how much money or assets they accrue, basically still don't get out of it. So sorry to end us on a super serious note after we started on the playoffs, but it was such an amazing piece, Brian, that I would have felt irresponsible, especially how we talked about this on our show. Like if we didn't talk about that this week, I would have been angry. And so sorry to keep our
No, I mean
schedule.
I watched it too. It was tough to get through. I think yeah, people just have a lot of different mentalities. I think people do get desensitized by the internet. Like they watch stuff and read stuff like this all day, and they start to think it's not a big deal and doesn't affect people. And I mean, it's kind of trite to say that, but it has to be said. And I have spoken with people who have the mentality you were talking about at the beginning of this segment, which is basically, this isn't a big deal. It's been happened to me, and you should man up. And I think it's just people like conflict. Like there's people who will get death threats and be like, "All right, come at me, bro." And I just have to echo what you said earlier. I mean, it's sad to me in a way. That's not the world I want to live in, but a lot of people are like that.
Yeah, it's weird, and I mean, it is hopeful that if something bad goes on, that your take should be empathy. Your take should be, wow, that really sucks. What can I do to help? Not, well, I had to go through it too, so it's no big deal.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
I've had someone told me I got a death threat on the internet, and my reply was to send my address to the person and told them to come to my house. So that's the kind of mentality we're talking about. And
Don't
yeah,
don't, don't do that, Brian.
no, well, I don't get death threats. I'm too nice. But I mean, no, but all I'm trying to say is, kind of in response to that, maybe some people are tough guys, but a lot of people aren't. And of course, people should not be exposed to this.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that got dark quick. We ready to go to shout outs? We got a few of them.
I've got a shout out. Shout out to Skip Bayless, who is leaving ESPN. And I don't know what we're going to do without Skip Bayless to talk about, but I'm sure he'll resurface at some point.
Well, Stephen A. I mean, did you catch the funness with Stephen A. Smith with the,
The
I'm
I
not.
love you, man moment. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about him calling out Arietta for being on steroids, and his basic argument was,
Oh.
"I'm not saying he's on steroids, but I'm not saying he's on steroids," which is, it's classic ESPN Stephen A. nonsense. Which it's amazing that he's still around and still gets away with it. So whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. I have nothing to say on that.
nothing to say on that.
Stephen A. Although, okay, I'd have one thing to say on that. Watch Stephen A. Smith versus Stephen B. Smith. That was a pretty funny segment recently. Stephen B. did a really good job.
Oh, I've not seen or even heard
We'll
about.
have to dig that up.
I'll have to check it out. All right. Well, I've gotten everything I wanted to talk about, Brian. Shout outs. Actually, I'll give to the Ladies League. They had some fantastic articles recently. A great one on hockey, basically how they shut down collegiate women's hockey on TV, and it still managed to outperform the men's in terms of the finals. And then I haven't gotten a chance to read, but Molly Cosby is one of my favorites, and she's got one on why are we celebrating, which was once a football disgrace, which is, I guess, talking about Josh Norman. So I'll have to take a look at that. But yeah, we definitely enjoy the ladies' league out there, and I think that's all I got. Don't have any other shout outs I can think off the top of my head, which I apologize for because I'm sure there's some great people out there this week that I'm forgetting.
Shout out to everyone, to the world.
Shout out to everyone. All right. And then you actually put this, but yeah, shout out definitely to the twitch.tv comment section. Definitely Andrew Sutton. Thanks for commenting along, for keeping Brian on point. And anyway, that's going to be our show. Brian, I'll let you start playing the outro video. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geeks Show. Go ahead and vote us up. I guess it helps us out. People say metrics matter. I don't know. I don't really care. If you didn't find us through our site, we are on boxscoregeeks.com, and we go live every either Tuesday or Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Give or take a few minutes if I'm running late. Twitch.tv/nerd numbers. You missed the live show, you can catch us, channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. And with that, hope you enjoy the playoffs, and we'll see you next week.